Judge, one makes people fall in love with a movie. We believe that it isn't because they've seen the same character for the 20th time. We believe that it's because they deserve, like, they discover something new, like something unexpected, and something that, like, memorable. And we believe that this is exactly why these movie studios should focus on creating entirely new original characters. More than proud to propose. So today I have two arguments. So our first argument is about how people are going to people are going to love these kinds of new characters, and now remaking is only going to reduce the popularity. And secondly, how these new characters will indeed succeed at the end of the day. So moving on to our team's argument, we believe that the movie industry has become obsessed with things like remakes, reboots, and prequels because they seem financially safe. However, we believe that this obsession is actually just making movies less exciting because when audiences already know the character, they already know their things like their personality or their backstory and even often how the story will end. We believe that the sense of discovery disappears in this case. And we believe that people don't go to the cinema just to watch something familiar. However, they basically go there to like be amazed, right? So we believe that original characters give writers complete creative freedom. So therefore they can create like things like new personalities, motivations, worlds, and conflicts that has never existed before. For example, people like characters like Moana, they weren't created by rewriting an older Disney princess. She had her own culture, her own struggles, and her own personality.
POI.
No, thank you. She was built from things like scratch. The audiences connected with her even more as an individual rather than constantly comparing her to another character. And we believe that this also explains why this kind of original movies continue to break through despite having no existing fan base, because movies like Dune introduced audiences to an entirely new world on a big screen, like creating curiosity and discussion because nobody really knew what to expect, right? Because it's original. And believe that every even like internet phenomena like the backrooms became extremely popular because people are naturally attracted to things like mysterious ideas. And we believe that humans in this case crave novelty. And we
POI.
obsessed with things that are like after this surprises, not some things we have already seen over and over again. Yes.
So studios make a lot of films a year, probably like around 30. So why must they pick one approach instead of doing both things?
No, we believe that we're obviously going to have to choose this approach because these kind of remakes they never actually work, right? We believe that only this system is only going to lead to more popularity in this case. So second, we believe that the opposition might argue that the existing characters already have fans and therefore are more successful. But we believe that having fans also means like having expectations as well. And we believe that every remake does not really satisfy millions of people who already have their own image of their character. And we believe that remakes are always trapped between being things like too different or too similar. However, we believe that original characters also do not have this problem because they're basically judging the quality of the story itself and not how closely they resemble a previous version, right? We believe that this basically like helps these new content indeed be more like be succeed because one, these movie industry failed because of things like prequels and remakes. However, we believe that by getting a movie like the for example the Get Out movie, it was directed by a black director with a black character and believe that it was really popular, right? So we believe that this is extremely important for representation because instead of changing the race or identity of an existing character, which often creates things like black backlash and reduces minorities to replacements, we believe that we create heroes whose identities are basically part of the story from the beginning. And we believe that likewise, like Black Panther became a global icon because these audiences embrace their hero who had his own story, history, culture, and world, not because he basically replaced somebody else, right? We believe that ultimately every kind of legendary character was once like an unknown idea, right? If studios only recycle the past, they'll actually never create like a next generation of like original characters, right? Original characters basically inspire things like imagination and give audiences something every remake cannot, which is the excitement of discovering someone completely new. And that is why we're more than proud to propose. Thank you.
Judge, I don't think the government team understands how a movie like theater works and how the people who create movie works. So understand that our side also creates new films, not just recycling old ones. So why can't these movie studios actually recycle them? Because they have a ton of movies to make. They don't just have to rely on one like way to create movies and show representation. They can always create new films and they can always create other topics and other films. I think they have to understand that point in today's debate. Firstly, I would like to go over some definitions in this debate. Secondly, frame this debate. And thirdly, give stakeholders. And before finally moving on to our second argument, which is about firstly how like this is going to deliver representation, and secondly how the choice, how like the studios can do both. Firstly, some quick definitions. A legacy character is a character with decades of cultural and fame behind them, such as like Ariel, James Bond, and Spider-Man. So characters that millions of people across the globe already love. The motion states that when the studio remakes these characters, they should not change their gender, race, or background, and instead they should build an entirely new original character to achieve diversity. Yes, I'll take your POI.
So you talk about during your previous POI, you talk about how you need to. You talk about how you want to choose both, but you can't just say that you can't do both. What do you say about this?
So this motion only talks about in order for representation, we'll actually rather choose this over one another. So that does not state that we can only choose one way. The studio film can always create more and new ideas and create create new movies that are completely different. Moving on to stakeholders. So what does this debate actually about? So the most important stakeholders are groups of underrepresentation, such as like different ethnicities, different people like LGBTQ, and girls and like other people who grew up watching heroes that look nothing like them. We want to actually reward them and give them something that they can actually relate to in everyday life. Moving on to our first argument about how we actually give representation. Firstly, a character must spend years and fortunes earning a cultural relevance, right? To become this character, like a legacy character. A legacy character already has it, and when a studio casts a black Ariel or like a female doctor, people who would never seek out an unknown like film suddenly like encounter that representation of the biggest possible stage, because the legacy character is already so big. They already have like this like base that they can like stack up on, so they're going to get more representation logically. So the live action like Little Mermaid, like their Little Mermaid like whatever had like a lot of like reached a lot of children worldwide, and like a lot of like black women and black girls were like actually happy about this because they finally got something that they can actually relate to in public and daily life. So in our world, we actually value these people, and we say that these people can actually have something that they can really relate to in day-to-day life, instead of just watching somebody like the opposite gender, opposite ethnicity that they cannot relate to or feel similarity to. Moving on to a second argument about how studios can do both. So legacy characters are created in eras where only certain people were allowed to be heroes, right? They're out of date and they're not up to current standards. Reimagining them talks about how those roles are never meant to stay close. And also, the motions like rather than is like a false choice, because studios actually release dozens of films every year. They can always fund original diverse stories and reimagine like legacy characters in the same time. So forcing these people to only create like these new movie scenes, there's nothing different, because you can always create new movies, but but on their side, you're not able to actually just create this and reimagine this character that already has this much fame, which will actually impact a lot of diverse communities. Because of that, we take this debate home, and we're proud to oppose.
Miss Speaker, opposition side loses the debate from the moment in which they don't decide, in which the moment they don't realize that they're not debating on the right motion. They speak to us as if they can encounter both sides on making legacy characters and original characters, but the motion clearly states on how you can only choose one. Therefore, they have read the motion wrong. They also talk a lot about how they want to represent like other people. If they truly want to represent certain cultures and stuff, we believe that they should create new characters. We believe that to a certain extent, it is still not mutually exclusive, that both sides would encounter money to make these kind of movies. Therefore, we believe that the better use of using this money would be making new things that could much more better represent these kind of cultures without anyone hating it or such. The previous speaker talked about how students won't get impacted by big because of one movie. We believe that this is just an excuse to talk about if the movie backlashes. We can easily see in movies such as the Black Ariel, movies such as the Brown Snow White, people absolutely hated it. They lost money, lots of money. We believe that they cannot set any excuses for this, and we believe that they need to set any more certain examples to prove so. They also talk about how they can only reimagine with legacy characters, and that there is nothing different with this. We already, our first speaker already told you, Madam Speaker, we already have certain examples to prove to you on how the black Ariel or brown Snow White was hated because people replaced it. Not only because it's a different actor, it's because people replaced it. The studio replaced it with other actors. It's literal hand me overs of a acting of a role. Now moving on to our argument on how the studio will lose money. Every case they replace their character, everything blackfired. Like for example, Black Ariel and Brown Snow White. So they're
You all, ma'am.
thank you. Let's talk about the examples of succeeded movies. Let's talk about the Black Panther. People absolutely love this. It's a new culture represented by a new kind of character. Let's think about Dune. Even though it's still another example of still a white person, it's still another example of new content earning a lot of money. So the problem with the premise of the remake is that remake itself
You
means
all,
that it's
ma'am.
a story, but they need to be eye catching under the premise. Yes.
How are we going to ensure that backlash is not happening in your world since you guys also create new and new styles of characters?
We believe that the only point of backlash we're talking about is when you're literally giving hand-me-over roles to a certain people. We believe that is an unjust and unfair role to do to other people. Therefore, we believe that your side believes that actual more kind of backlash to more people. Therefore, continuing on, it needs to be eye-catching under the premise that people watch short videos all day long. Therefore, we need more eye-catching content. Just replacing leftover same content it's just the same content as hand-me-overs to different races. We believe that this is a very unjust and unfair situation to do. Therefore, we believe that this must be stopped. So the two definite harms with this is that it's literal hand me over to literal races. Therefore, meaning that there can be more hate and lose more money. Therefore, a second, you offend these people, yet there's also little income, so there's no win-win for you, and then you're just getting hate all day long. So what we need to do then, we need to make new characters. We need to using money to make these movies to both sides are mutually exclusive, but the difference is that we get more income and more profit given to the studio in our world compared to up. And please note that we're not only thinking about the profit, we're thinking about the representation, the cultures, and the other kind of races need. We therefore believe that representing them, in which our third speaker is going to talk about their clash, we believe that representing them by handing them a new role, or handing them another role from a character we thought about so long ago, giving them hand-me-overs is not a justified thing to do. We win this factor of profit and stakeholders of studios and also for the actors and races. The burden the opposition side had was on how we ensure the popularity on the profit on the studio and the movie itself. You need to prove any examples of how these cases succeed, but they don't. Therefore, they do not prove this burden. Second, on how they create no backlash by replacing white actors with actors that have different backgrounds. They do not prove this. Therefore, we win this debate from the get-go. Thank you.
I want to clarify something very important. The motion of this debate is that this house believes that movie studios should focus on creating entirely new original characters rather than changing the gender, race, or background of existing legacy characters in remakes. This is specifically talking of the government team or the proposition team, and that they should be focused and they should prove how focusing on creating entirely new original characters rather should be prioritized rather than changing the gender, race, or background of existing legacy characters in remakes. What we are saying is that the opposition team does not have to prove that changing existing legacy characters in remakes is better than movie studios trying to create entirely new characters. We strongly believe that this motion suggests that proposition is to prove why movie studios should focus on entirely new characters, but the opposition side can either take the stance of supporting and rather trying to have changing the gender, race, or background of existing legacy characters, or taking on the stance of having a mix of both and having both because these large film industries and these large corporations like Fox, 20th Century Fox, and Universal Studios have enough money to produce both new remakes and totally new movies. Yes.
Wasn't that the burden that we needed to prove the motion, and you are just reading the motion incorrectly at the end of the day?
I'm not really sure what you're saying, and basically our burden is to prove that your side is wrong and that movie studios should not be focusing on creating new characters, but rather it could either be a mix. So you guys are all the way here, but we're in the middle or towards like this area. We can take either stance, but we choose to take one stance over the other, and your side does not understand this. Now moving on to the rebuttals of this debate. So the government team basically does not understand that, as I've said before, large studios like 20th Century Fox and Universal Studios have enough money to basically produce both new remakes and totally new movies. They have both the resources, the time, and the infrastructure to be able to make all of these new movies, and they have shared some things before, and movies have been taking place in both areas before, so there can be cooperation between the two. We also believe that basically this is not like the same content over and over again, that there are small tweaks to the story, and that this is what creates new stories. We also believe that what the government team is saying is not true. Yes, Snow White and Black Ariel might have lost a bit of money, and might have been labeled as a failure. But we believe that this is not actually a failure, and that this shows that the movie industry is changing and toward a more diverse area and a more diverse way of viewing movies, and that this is a brand new a brand new kind of a new changing trend for movies that are basically for people who are basically have different skin color or a different gender. We believe that these are empowering these kinds of people, and that even if the general public doesn't believe that this is a success, we believe that this is still a success because because Disney and all these studios got what they wanted. They basically wanted to create a new movie for minorities, and they succeeded. The third and last argument of the opposition team is basically that uh make is that basically telling minorities to make your own movie is basically an excuse to almost like sideline and bench minority stories. We basically think that telling like minority groups to just make their own character is basically just ignoring them, and it basically dodges the actual problem, and it basically sidelines the actual problem that we think. For decades, studios called minority-led films like too risky and made almost none, which recognizable franchises always got funded. Go make your own too often meant like wait your turn for an infinite amount of time. As a result, very proud to oppose.
In the status quo, making new characters makes people fall in love with movies. However, remaking these characters for just remaking them for like making them gay, black, white, so on, is a complete waste of money, and it's unprofitable for these people or these companies. I'm going to be presenting one major clash in this debate today as the government won. From the LO, they probably didn't understand the motion from the get-go, so we can probably see that we have already taken this debate home. Also, their side is being very uncharitable with what they were saying at the end of the day. Before I move on to my clashes, I would like to say this. The moment the opposition tried to have a mix within their case is when they realize they lose the margin with profit, representation, and the convenience to us. Therefore, we have won from the get-go of today's debate. They give us no examples of what has actually worked and what has not. They don't even solve their own burdens, further proving this point. So if OP doesn't prove why remakes are better than characters, why do these people disagree with the motion then? So also why remakes should happen if they lost money, and OP can prove a single reason why this is good and or have actual examples of success. They cannot even provide examples. So they're constantly talking about when them using a mix. They had not read the motion properly, but even if they do, they still don't receive more profit compared to only choosing one side. Now, yes.
You keep talking about profit. Does that mean that you rather want profit of the movie companies and the movie studios instead of giving these people actual representation?
No, we're trying to say we want to make profit through making new characters, not actually using these remakes of these characters, which are unprofitable and which people criticize a lot about at the end of the day. Moving on. The clash is who better attracts the audiences at the end of the day. So to a certain extent, we agree that it can attract some people, but at the majority, they're gonna come to new characters. When Black Panther was made, a lot of people attracted new characters. However, when there was a brown Snow White or a Latino Snow White, nobody went to watch it. The majority of people did not want to go watch it at the end of the day because it was just a remake and then it didn't follow the legacy and it didn't help the children at the end of the day in learning so on. So, as the Prime Minister has already stated and emphasized multiple times, movies are not trying to re-symbolize. They're trying to create new ideas and trying to give them new opinions of what they have. If they want to have a better legacy at the end of the day, as both the opposition and the government side want to do, then we can just create new characters. Why is that much of a problem? They spend the same amount of money, but just it's going to be much harder for those people at the end of the day if they're actually making remakes, which are probably not gonna have much profit. And we have already proved to you several reasons why it does not make any profit at the end of the day. Also, our side better attracts with an alternative, such as making a new kind of character in which represents them much better. If you want to have a diverse idea, then we can use a Latino actress, but in a different way. For example, for Moana, we use a Hawaiian actor, which symbolizes correctly to the story, which is good. So, which is following the concept they need to follow. However, what if it's all of a sudden a white person? It's going to be a completely different background. It's going to be understood differently and people are going to start criticizing it. So that is the point where it is not charitable, nor is it profitable at the end of the day. So both sides have a similar goal. So if we want to have a diverse idea, they can create new characters which are more profitable. If the opposition side wants to create a new diverse idea, then they should be able to know that they should actually create new characters instead of remaking them just for criticization. Thank you.
Judge, in today's debate, I'm going to do three things. First, do some clarification. Second, do some rebuttals. And third, present the clash I identified in this debate. Now, I'd like to move on to my clarifications. Now, Judge, first clarification. Proposition must prove not only that original characters are valuable, but the movie studios should prioritize them over reimagining legacy characters, right? Judge, if both approaches can successfully promote and the diversity and all of those things, our side clearly wins this debate. Now, I would like to move on to my rebuttal straight away. Now, Judge, people watch movies. The side proposition had talked about people watch movies because they want a new story and all of those things. Now, Judge, it might be true for general movies. However, the thing is, this debate is on the remakes, right? Judge, people watch remakes because they want to go back and revisit the same story, the same iconic characters, and all of those things. Now, the side proposition has also talked about how the opposition will create backlash. However, Judge, the thing is, does side proposition not create any backlash? Now, Judge, let's do some meta debating here. Now, side opposition, I mean, I guess it may be true that we also create backlash. However, Judge, side proposition also has a high chance of creating backlash due to the new characters that are created in the movie films, right? Therefore, this argument is a deadlock, and this does not give any credit to the debate. Now, I would like to move on to my first clash I've identified, which is why would fans prefer a remake with an entirely new character instead of a remake featuring a fresh, re-image of a legacy character they already love. Now, Judge, let's first think about. I'll take that later. Let's first think about why the fans watch remakes in the first place, right? Judge, we believe that the fans watch the remakes primarily because they want to revisit the same story as mentioned in the clarification and the iconic characters, not to see completely new ones in the first place, right? Now, Judge, this basically means that a remake with a re-image legacy character preserves the emotional connection that the people originally had and the nostalgia that attracted audience in the first place, while offering the audience a new, completely while offering the audience like a more diverse with fresh new interpretations with the characters, right? But before I move on, I'd like to pick the POI.
So your side talked a lot about the stuff that we have already rebutted, but can you please give any examples of any instances of what your case and what your statements actually have worked before?
Okay, our stance is not to prove like that, like there were examples and all of those things in the first place, right? What we need to prove is that remakes are actually like the remakes with like new characters are like re-imaged characters are better than just creating the new ones. And I would like to further explain that in my classes. Now, the third point here, making new characters entirely like changes like the identity of like the remake itself so much that the fans might think like it's like a new movie and like not a remake in the first place, right? Now, Judge, this basically means that like the fans like would not actually want to watch the new movies, which could also create backlash in the first place. Now, Judge, like the fourth point here, compared to like creating new ones, making the legacy character like better like meets the fans' expectations of like what the remake actually looks like and all while changing it's like changing it to like a modern view and all of those things, right? Now, Judge, this is very important because as mentioned before in the start of the clash, fans watch remakes largely primarily because they want to revisit the same story and all of those things, right? However, Judge, side proposition does not meet any of the things our side has identified with like what the fans actually want and all of those things, right? And therefore, the side opposition clearly takes the debate and proud to oppose. Thank you.
The government told you today that the studios should abandon remaining legacy characters and invest entirely in originals. But their case only rests on the claim that remakes have failed and that the originals are more like better and going to like make more money, right? But then I'd like to first point out that they're actually measuring the wrong thing, and secondly, why the answer is actually like to make better remakes instead of just like abandoning remakes at all. So those two are going to be the main issues in this debate that I have found and which should actually judge this debate. Firstly, why are they measuring the wrong thing? The government pointed out at the controversy and said like reimaginings don't work. But that's like actually the wrong thing. We are not asking whether every remake was actually loved and like very hitting and good. We're asking whether it actually gets representation from the people who actually are supposed to get represented, right? We already gave an example opposed to what they keep repeating is like also in their POI. When The Mermaid came out, like a lot of on like short form platforms and all like SNS platforms, there was a lot of like clips of young black girls who watched the trailer and went like happy because they finally saw what they loved was actually a representation and another figure of themselves. What does this impact do? We already repeatedly told you this actually gives them hope and it shows them that there can be something better. So that happened because Ariel already had like the majority and everybody knew Ariel. A brand new character does actually not get that immediately, as it takes years to earn that reach across multiple and diverse populations. So when the government says remakes do not work, then like a film that struggles commercially but makes a child feel like actually seen is actually like what the debate is about. Moving on to our second issue about why the answer should be about better remakes. The government's conclusion from some of the reimaginings failing is to just ban them entirely. But when something is done badly, what is like the very first thing you think of? You do it better, right? Most reimaginings that underperformed did so because studios treated them diversity as a marketing decision rather than just like doing it for creativity. So this is actually just a failure of effort and a mistake from the filmmakers, not the idea itself. And we cannot just blanket ban and actually destroy this idea itself. More than proud to oppose.
That we believe that the opposition's response basically boils down to only one idea, right? That they can do both. However, we believe that studios can recycle old characters and still create new ones. So there's basically no harm in continuing, they said that there's basically no harm in continuing remakes, but we believe that this basically misses the core clash of the emotion, right? We believe that this debate is now about whether originals can exist, is about what studios should focus on. We believe that when we look at things like incentives or things like market behavior, it becomes very clear that doing both is not what actually happens in practice, right? We also believe that they try to run away with a representation argument, but judge how are Black people better represented when a European mermaid is being portrayed by a Black woman. We believe that the better representation is a news story centered around minorities and their culture. For example, things like Moana or Black Panther, instead of them getting the the hand-me-downs from these right cultures. We believe that right now studios already claim that they balance both in this case. However, in reality, they overwhelmingly prioritize existing intellectual property because it's safer. A known character comes with built-in audiences and predictable markets. However, we believe that this directly links to why their argument fails, right? Because they say that recycling can still deliver representation or do good, but we believe that the problem is not whether representation is possible, it's basically if it's meaningful and structurally prioritized. However, we believe that our side is the one that actually gives the better representation and better version of these people. And we believe that even if we accept their best case, that some remakes are well made, we believe that it still does not solve the core issue, which is things like opportunity cost, right? Because every single dollar or every marketing campaign, they're spending reviving an old character is not a dollar spent create the next iconic one, right? We believe that culture is not just about what actually works, it's about what gets the chance to exist in the first place. And we believe that they actually also didn't really engage with our points, right? And we believe that we talk with ourselves that we don't need to prove any examples because they know that they have no examples, right? From this, we can also infer that all of what they've been talking about are just mere statements. And believe that from the get-go, we have actually won this debate, and that is why we're more than proud to propose. Thank you.